Kept you waiting, huh?
Hypertension Films.
Cowabunga.
Don't make me do it! No.
Some of the games I've reviewed on this channel, like Fear, Bully, and Metal Gear Solid, are titles I've completed several times over the years. They're easy to talk about because I've spent so much time with each. Other games like Lollipop Chainsaw and Geist were long-held curiosities and first-time playthroughs. With this special comparison review, there's a bit of a mix. On one hand, I played Psi-Ops the Mindgate Conspiracy, developed by Midway Games right around launch in June of 2004. I beat the game a handful of times, loved it, and have always held it in high regard. On the other hand, I've always wanted to try Second Sight, but never made time. Developed by Free Radical Design, Second Sight was released only a few months after Psi-Ops, launching in September of 2004. Due to the coincidentally similar themes and close releases, it was only natural the games would be compared during that time. In an interview with Videogamer.com, renowned chemical facility scientist and Second Sight writer David Doak stated that he felt Psi-Ops and Second Sight launching so close to each other, quote, hurt both games, because it meant you kind of picked one, unquote. He then jokingly referenced the films Armageddon and Deep Impact, stating, quote, it's like imagine if two people had decided to make films about asteroids hitting the Earth in the same year, unquote. Oh, that Dokester, he's a real jokester. But he made a valid point. As mentioned, both games may seem similar at a glance, but upon deeper critical examination, Psi-Ops the Mindgate Conspiracy and Second Sight are distinct from one another in several ways. But which title is superior? Well, let us compare the two and make a decision. I usually begin most videos with a story synopsis, but in this case, I feel it's best saved for last. In the meantime, let's talk about how each game sounds, looks, and plays. Spoiler alert, the sound in Psi-Ops is only so-so. The weapon sound effects are pretty stock. They really lack the visceral punch of other third-person shooters of the time, like Max Payne 2. The machine gun effects are the typical rat-a-tat-tat, but thankfully the shotgun sounds are pretty beefy. And the various sounds when using Psi abilities all have a unique signature, such as the droning hum of using telekinesis, or the near demonic choir when you drain an enemy's mind until his head bursts.
That's gotta hurt! Those guys will never get ahead with that job. Sorry. Let's move on.
I also got a rush of nostalgia from hearing the item pickup stingers and menu sounds, oddly enough. The soundtrack is oddly scary, with overmodulated strings, piano stingers straight out of a spooky game, deep, bellowing synth notes, and 2 to 3 beat drum hits. It kind of reminds me of the soundtrack to Manhunt, albeit in a much, much less memorable way. I did think it was really cool that Midway was able to contract the band Cold to record an original song titled With My Mind for the game. I used to be a big fan of Cold during this era, specifically with their 2003 album, Year of the Spider, so this was right up my alley, and I still find myself occasionally whistling the chorus 20 years later. There's even a cute elevator rendition of With My Mind in the game that I had forgotten about. One thing I hadn't forgotten about, however, is the downright laughable acting in this game.
Scryer's gone. It's my body now.
Oh my god. What the fuck is going on?
Holy shit. The acting in this game is fantastically silly. The plot is B-movie stuff at best, so it doesn't bother me that the performances are so goofy, but they really, really are. Nick Scryer, the protagonist that we control, is essentially bargain bin Solid Snake. He even quips, "Damn," like our beloved bandana-clad hero.
Nick.
Okay, so meet up at the supply room, wherever that is. Damn, she seems familiar. But I don't know whether I should trust her, kill her. Whatever. At least she gave me a gun. It's better than a kick in the nuts.
Good dialogue. Nick's voice is kind of cheesy, but at least the guy has a modicum of sincerity in his performance. Sarah Blake, the double agent helping Nick out, sounds like she was reading from cue cards.
Help. If you'll trust me.
Do I have a choice?
We can split up and look for the General. But look out for Wrightson and these creatures. They seem to be under his control. He really seems to be toying with us.
He really seems to be toying with us.
Our parents would have never let us harness our true power. I killed them to ensure our future.
No. Oof. No offense to the actress, I'm sure she's lovely, but holy cannoli with a side of stromboli, that was rough. Aside from Barrett, the giant-sized kingpin-looking dude, the rest of the performances in Psi-Ops are all similarly cheesy. But again, the story is about as deep as a Saturday morning cartoon, so it's not offensive to the overall plot, and truth be told, I found it kinda charming in its awfulness. Especially when it comes to the General.
The setup checks will have to be bypassed. I won't tolerate any more delays.
Don't know what you're asking. The fusion process is highly unstable.
Our security has been compromised. Weilu's cloaking has gone down. The process must be completed before you end.
This dude's ultra gruff affectation is fantastic. Nothing screams generic military guy / supervillain like the General in Psi-Ops. He sounds like Stone Cold.
Isn't it beautiful? It's everything we've worked for.
I'm fixing to stomp a psychic mudhole in your ass, what? Jesus Christ, son. I didn't say TK surf your ass across the whole map. You gotta play the actual level. What? Scryer 316 says I just mind drained your ass. What? You probably get the point. Composed by Graham Norgate and Christensen Markison, the soundtrack for Second Sight is absolutely brilliant. There really isn't much in the way of a main theme that you'll be humming to yourself after playing the game, but the tracks here are incredible. If you don't recognize Graham Norgate's name, perhaps you'd recognize some of his credits. Donkey Kong Land and Jet Force Gemini, Diddy Kong Racing and GoldenEye, Blast Core and Perfect Dark, just to name a few, Killer Instinct and Time Splitters 2. So yeah, anyway, the soundtrack Graham composed will remind you a whole lot of his previous work. This is a good thing. Beautiful yet somber piano, synth strings, and lovely chamber vocals, much like those heard in Time Splitters 2. It's all lovely and complements the tone of the game just right. Speaking of time splitters,
Vatic, you okay?
Yeah. No. I can't stop shaking.
Pull yourself together, man. You gave a good account of yourself back there. You saved her life. She's important, you know.
And
if you've played Time Splitters 2 or 3, you might have recognized the voice of Colonel Joshua Stark there. Yeah, that's Cortez himself, Tom Clark Hill. Colonel Stark is the leader of a group of Marines named Winter Ice. I like that Stark is not a cliche, cigar-chomping, drop-and-give-me-20 character. He's a durable, stout man, but very supportive and congratulatory when someone under his command excels in the field. Tom Hill's performance as Stark is layered enough to where you'll appreciate his leadership, but then you can feel his relief when he recognizes John inside of his home later in the game.
Put your hands up.
Okay. Don't shoot.
John? John, my God, you're alive.
Colonel?
I thought you'd been killed. With the others in Dubransk.
It's my favorite performance in Second Sight. Dr. John Vatic, our primary protagonist, is voiced by Andrew Lawson. Mr. Lawson does a great job of alternating between past John, a confident MIT scientist with a PhD in psychology, to present day John, a near-broken amnesiac on the verge of complete psychosis. Interestingly, Andrew only has one other acting credit to his name, a small bit part in a film. But no other voice acting credits that I could find, which is unfortunate. However, he is an animator and has worked on several prominent films, such as Frozen, Big Hero 6, and Olaf's Frozen Adventure. I'm a theater kid. The remainder of the cast does a fine job, and I would consider it above average, especially for a 2004 video game.
Dead. He's been tortured.
He's just an ordinary pipeline.
Grienko. They thought he knew where Grienko was.
They?
We're not the only ones looking for him.
Those snipers?
At times, the acting is a bit odd.
Are you a professional wrestler?
No, but I am. What? Alright, so Psi-Ops has some limp weapon sound effects, a completely forgettable soundtrack, save for the special song by Cold, and the cheesiest voice acting this side of Spencer Mansion. The item pickup, menu, and sound effects of your Psi abilities are pleasant and will be familiar to anyone who has played the game before. Second Sight delivers somewhat weak, though better sound effects to that of Psi-Ops, but the voiceover performances are certainly of a finer quality. And with Graham Norgate's phenomenal soundtrack as the backbone to the game's overall tone, Second Sight gets the nomination for Superior Audio Design. Yeah, whatever, jackass. Psi-Ops, for its day, was an excellent advertisement for the Havoc physics engine, and it really was something special. Whereas Max Payne 2 utilized Havoc physics brilliantly the year prior in a more grounded setting, Psi-Ops ratcheted things up a level with the introduction of Psi abilities, namely with telekinesis, or TK. Large objects have a feeling of genuine weight, such as this gigantic stone ball. Boxes tumble and smash appropriately, bodies flail in midair and make a sick thud when you launch them against a wall, which is, to this day, super satisfying. And one boss fight in particular is essentially a big physics flex by Midway. The splatter in the game is pretty gnarly too, and I had kind of forgotten how brutal Psi-Ops could be. It makes sense that Midway developed this, given the ties with Mortal Kombat and such, but TKing enemies into giant fan blades or popping their grape with a shotgun was still pretty intense. Additionally, some of the facial animations during cutscenes are surprisingly good, if a little over the top. Occasionally, some of the lighting is pretty convincing, especially for a 20-year-old PS2 game. as are the solid mirage effects in areas of extreme heat. And although the story is wafer thin and schlocky, cutscenes all look pretty good. The animation and character designs are done really well, with standouts like Barrett and Leonov being fairly memorable. The scene that shows a bit about how troops are turned into meat puppets, yeah, that's what they're called, is pretty harsh and brutal. It kind of reminds me a bit of Dead Space or Quake 4. It's a shame then that nearly every environment is essentially bland, boring, and brown. So much brown. Sometimes you get a splash of dark green and gray with a host of metallic industrial environs, and they're all super dull. I don't mind the muddy textures given how old the game is, and I really love the distinctive, somewhat smudged look of the PS2. It's kind of charming. But when a game has the color palette of burnt sienna and moss, playing through each level became monotonous very quickly. Right from the get-go, you'll notice that Second Sight has a tremendous, distinct style. Even the title screen and menu shows a fully animated John Vadek desperately mulling over a computer monitor as the angles change frequently to emphasize his panic. The computer doesn't appear to be plugged in, but The cutscenes are excellent, and the direction is on point. I really love the sparing use of Dutch angles to highlight how disorienting certain scenarios are, especially in Penfold Asylum with the raging storm carrying on in the background. Green skies hang ominously over the spooky, gothic architecture of the old-timey mental asylum. The hand-drawn animations during these scenes are incredible. Although I do appreciate the more realistic presentation of games utilizing mocap, which is the standard nowadays, there's something so special about these scenes crafted by the hands of an artist. And in general, I really like the character designs. John Vadek in particular feels lovingly crafted. I like that he alternates between a common bookworm with fairly plain clothes and a broken, disheveled mental patient with a shaved head and plenty of bandages, giving him lots of character. This also helps the player clearly identify which part of the timeline we're in, and I imagine that some of you clicked on this video because you recognized old John Boy from the cover art. And while it may seem like graphical minutia, if you look at the little details on characters like Jane in the mental asylum, you'll notice things like cuts up and down her thighs. This isn't outright explained, but you can infer, based on her behavior and dialogue, that she's been through some awful experiences. The only complaint one could make, and it's subjective, is the slightly cartoony look to the characters clashing against the dire story rife with cruel experimentation and implied torture in an asylum. The snow effects in several of the Siberian flashback levels are absolutely gorgeous. Big, thick flakes drifting in the sky and at times melting on the, quote, lens. This juxtaposed against the warm glow of a campfire. Brilliant. Free Radical truly were experts with the 6th generation of consoles, and although I'm playing this on the PC, which is of course slightly beefed up, the engine still runs smoothly on consoles, and you needn't look further than Timesplitters 2 for proof of that. Environments have a healthy variety and are packed with details. In the mission titled Childcare, if you look closely inside of these holding cells, you'll see little cannons painted along the wall, children's artwork, and small beds crammed into little spaces. This is a bit grim, of course, but a fantastic use of visuals to further the game's storytelling. Granted, not all character faces are as fluid and expressive as the main cast. But I do think it's cool that Free Radical employed people from West Virginia. Hey!
Next list.
Also, check out the spindly little turbo legs that John has. And, as was typical of Free Radical games, some of the animations are amazing. During a shotgun battle, I inadvertently blasted this dude in his package. I didn't think much of it as I swept his buddy up with my next shot. As I looked back at him, I noticed he was assessing his damage and coming to terms with his demise. Then he fell. This is obviously kind of brutal, but displays a phenomenal attention to detail on part of the animation team. The only real issue with the graphics isn't really an issue in an isolated sense, but more when being compared to Psi-Ops, which is kind of the point here. So, unlike Psi-Ops and its use of the Havoc physics engine, Second Sight is decidedly less glorious on a technical level with regards to ragdoll physics. From my understanding, the team had intentions of polishing up the physics along with some gameplay aspects, but simply couldn't due to lack of time and financing. It's a shame too, because after flinging around heavy objects and bodies with the appropriate amount of heft to them in Psi-Ops, it felt comparatively gimped, just simply lifting up enemies or fartily floating around water heaters and rubbish bins. Well, you can't have it all, I suppose. So, it's safe to say that neither game is a graphical powerhouse, nor were they back when they were released. On one hand, you have the technical glamour of Psi-Ops and its use of Havoc physics, which does directly influence the gameplay. Yet, the art style and color palette are about as appealing as frozen cat turds. Conversely, Second Sight has many resplendent environments filled with detail. Character designs are modeled with love, if a little cartoonish for the dead serious nature of the storyline. Weather effects are gorgeous, and the hand-drawn animations during cutscenes are pure art. Yes, the physics aren't nearly as impressive as they are in Psi-Ops, but the gameplay and level design isn't tailored around them, so it's kind of a moot point. Both games have their merits and their shortcomings, and I love playing around with Psi-Ops physics, but ultimately, I could look at the composition of Second Sight all day. Second Sight wins this one. Alright, so now we're in the meat of the topic. How do the games actually play? Well, anyone that's ever played Psi-Ops will no doubt remember it. You may not remember the stories, the characters, soundtrack, etc., but you damn sure remember the amazing physics-based sandbox style of gameplay that Midway gave us. Our protagonist, Nick Scryer, gains access to a total of 6 Psi powers, starting with telekinesis, or TK, allowing Nick to basically grab objects and enemies and throw them about at will. We'll talk about the other abilities, but this is easily the most prominent one. Utilizing the aforementioned Havoc physics engine, lifting enemies with one hand and ragdolling them into objects against walls or off of a cliff feels just right every time. Even just the simple act of lifting an enemy and peppering him with your firearm is crisp and fluid. Psi-Ops does a tremendous job of giving you the feeling that you're in control of Nick's every move, and hurtling around objects hasn't felt this good in video games since, with the exception of maybe The Force Unleashed or Control. And Nick's movement in general feels perfect. He runs, cuts, and jumps like a mix between Nico Bellic in GTA 4 and Gabe from Siphon Filter. There's an appropriate amount of weight blended with the right amount of gamey physics to prevent things from feeling sluggish. You can even choose 2 different movement options, free or strafe. It's tricky to explain, but with strafe mode, Nick moves laterally along the frontal plane with the ability to run backwards in a retro pattern. Free mode is sort of like moving on an axis, offering a greater degree of rotational movement in a 360-degree plane, but without backwards running. They're both totally viable and come down to player preference and highlight the aforementioned movement wonderfully. Remote viewing, or RV, is a Psi ability that lets the player leave Nick's body and recon up ahead. Considering this game is not about stealth in the least, it's kind of pointless. You're given the impression that you can do some sneaking because Nick can crouch walk and do a really bad sneak attack, but before long you'll be back to slamming people with your brain. Really though, RV is only used to solve a couple of dumb puzzles like finding a key code for a door. Mind Drain is essentially filling your psi energy meter by juicing someone else's brain. You can use psi hypos and rejuvenator kits, but those are best saved for tougher battles. A dead body grants a modicum of psi energy, while sneaking up and melting a dude will not only pop his head, but you get a bigger pool of energy. In a cool little detail, a headless body is unable to be drained, so be careful with that axe, Eugene. Mind control is pretty sweet and quite useful. You can unlock doors, commit fratricide, and you can make a man, unalive himself. I really enjoyed being able to hijack the body of a sniper to clear out areas. Super handy. Sadly, pyrokinesis, sucks. In BioShock, shooting fire from your hand was a power trip and ultra gratifying. In Psi-Ops, it's a cloud of hot air with next to no range. Cooking heavy shock troopers, aka the Helghast, aka the Kerberos, in their metal armor is kinda cool, but that's about it. Shame. The last ability Nick unlocks is Aura View. Much like pyrokinesis, it also sucks. AV is used to see things outside of your visible reality. Woo! You can see structural weaknesses in walls, which lead to the occasional health pickup. You can see remnants of the past, like a code scribbled on a whiteboard. It gives you this fuzzy visual filter with this god-awful haze around the player. Another thing that AV does is reveal aura beasts. God damn it, I hate these things. I hate them so much. I was really enjoying playing Psi-Ops again after 2 decades away. And then I got to Aura Beasts, and I couldn't wait to beat this game. This is that late game nonsense, and Second Sight has a little of this too, just you wait. But there's this trend, especially in a lot of older games, where you're cruising along, having a good old time, and then the developers just throw in a large swath of extra difficult, often irritating late game enemies. In Psi-Ops, it's these random beasts from another dimension or some such nonsense. Suddenly Nick is James Sunderland. They'll hound you and corner you and jump on you before trying to gobble your face off. Use TK and just keep moving. It's annoying, but not impossible. The other massive pain in the butt near the end of the game are these mines, only visible in Aura View. This terrible segment in these tunnels with these mines had me a little miffed, let's say. The mines can only be tripped with a body, either a fallen enemy's or your own. If you use a meat puppet to blow a mine leading to a dead end, well, you're just shit out of luck and need to restart a checkpoint. This section is so poorly designed, and it was baffling to me after playing a relatively smooth, fast-paced game otherwise. Sure, some of the puzzles are a little nonsensical, like needing to blow up a fence to progress in an area where it's never indicated that the fence is what's holding you back, but all in all, the level design is mostly solid. I say mostly because, in addition to the mine tunnel area, is a corny section in a gully. A thing I like a lot about Psi-Ops is that each combat arena is an opportunity to get creative with your powers and weapons to get yourself out of a jam. It gives a taste of what a masterpiece like Dishonored 2 would give us 12 years later. However, getting sniped by a rocket in a big open area stinks. This, while fumbling over the terrain and taking chip damage from the skinny wieners standing around, is, pardon my language, dookie. I guess you just use these convenient, loose boulders. All right. Then, randomly, late in the game, Nick finds a Psi recharging station straight out of Metroid, except the chamber only tops off your meter while you're standing in it. It just goes back when you leave. Well, that was pointless, and now a whole hallway full of aura beasts. That is just great. Boss fights are pretty underwhelming on the whole. Calypso from Twisted Metal here is a basic fight where you simply throw stuff at him and let rip a few bullets here and there. The main technique is TK. The fight against Wei Lu starts with a fight against the Terracotta Army, and then what the oh boy. It then turns into a battle against Liu Kang's obese animality, where you throw vases and chunks of limestone at this fat reptile. It's bizarre, though relatively painless, and the running animation as the dragon fatly waddles across the screen is hilarious. Again, the main technique is TK. The Fire Lady boss is as follows. You TK propane tanks at her, while she shouts fire-related quips until she hits the ground, at which point you TK propane tanks at her again.
Ripping out your soul and using your body to take the monolith for myself!
Whoa, Jesus Christ. So, the fight against Wrightson is, I kid you not, against a bunch of television screens and god damn it, aura beasts. It was at this point that I wanted to finish Psi-Ops badly. And the ending is so goofy. Wrightson just trips balls, the aura beast shakes its dussy, and they chomp him, I guess. Oh, and once again, the technique was TK. I ain't no sexy boy, son. Alright, so the final fight against the general is pretty lame. They say, use all of your powers. But really, I just used a little dash of pyro and a little bit of TK to throw these random magical balls at this floating tool. You've likely noticed the TK trend. It's kinda lame that your other powers were barely incorporated into the boss battles overall, but at least there is one fight where TK makes total sense, and that's the clash against Barrett. This fight is honestly incredible, and another spectacle for the physics model in Psi-Ops. Barrett is the dude that basically taught you everything you know, and he's superior with telekinesis. It's the second boss fight in the game, and at this point, you feel pretty cool throwing around little boxes and propane canisters and such. That is, until you go against this behemoth hurtling train carts and full-size shipping containers at you. Although it's been 20 years since I played Psi-Ops, I still very vividly remember that this was the moment I fell in love with this game. The feeling of being overmatched, dodging these massive obstacles, and fighting for your life is thrilling, and to this day, this is one of the most memorable boss fights I've ever seen in a video game. One last feature to mention is the wealth of extra content included in Psi-Ops. I really appreciate the behind-the-scenes documentaries and the music video for With My Mind and that, but then you have the ability to play through all training stages, all boss fights in either individual battles or no rush mode, a bizarre co-op mode where one player controls Nick and the other player controls his powers. No, seriously. You can play through each mission in arcade mode where you rack up points for various actions, and there are a whole host of extra missions unlocked by finding hidden garden gnomes in each level. I'm not joking. Collecting these little porcelain scamps unlocks bonus missions, and I love when games incorporate these offbeat, madcap little extras. Unfortunately, the missions that I unlocked, and there are several more missing from my list, were basically gimmicky challenges with psi powers. Maybe it's a skill issue, and I'm sure some Eastern Bloc dude out there has mastered them all or whatever, and that's awesome, but I sucked. I couldn't find the crates to knock over the idol in the second one. The third one I played, a type of snooker, is great in concept, but you have to switch to aura view to see the pool balls, which started to give me a goddamn headache, and nope. You can also unlock a bevy of costumes and characters to play as, even unlocking Scorpion from Mortal Kombat, though I didn't get him on my save file. But really, why would you need to play as some scrub like Ed Boon's butt dog when you could play as Stone Cold Colonel Clown 316? I'm fixing to make you a wiener dog made out of balloons. What? I think I huffed gas as a kid or something. Oh, and the guns pretty much suck in Psi-Ops. It is what it is.
I'm alone. I am not lonely.
Excellent.
Whereas Psi-Ops is by and large a physics-heavy action sandbox with a few simple puzzles and a teeny tiny touch of stealth, Second Sight is a much thicker blend of the three. John Vatic is a fairly nimble guy. He can't jump and mantle objects as freely as Nick Scryer, but the levels are designed in such a way that you don't need to bunny hop everywhere. Vatic is able to run, creep, mount ladders, hurdle over railings, take cover, and peek through doors and out of lockers that you can hide in. The game wears its Metal Gear influence on its sleeve, which isn't a bad thing. And stealth is a much bigger factor in Second Sight than it is in Psi-Ops. There are missions, especially in the Siberian flashbacks, where the game essentially funnels you into shootouts, but for the most part you can sneak through a great deal of this game. I'm reluctant to admit it because I'm such a gigantic fan of clandestine games, but I struggled a little bit for the first few hours of Second Sight. I was trying to play like a traditional sneaking game, which is viable, but there are some issues I had with the stealth system. In addition to the wonky camera, which I'll talk more about shortly, there is no indication as to how visible you are or how much noise you're making, nor is there an on-screen radar showing enemy position or their field of view. This isn't inherently bad. I mean, I've beaten Snake Eater on European Extreme a few times, and you get next to no help there. But games that take place in these linear, symmetrical areas do seem to benefit from some sort of radar, especially maybe on a lower difficulty setting for a first-time run. However, after a handful of hours, Second Sight did start to click, and when I was mixing up psi powers, tranquilizer darts, and a bit of guile, I was able to cruise through an area relatively easily, and these aforementioned issues basically resolved. There are also some nice little touches that raise the stakes, such as guards noticing footprints that you leave behind, despite your power to vanish. John can take cover, slink around said cover, hide in lockers, creep through vents, and utilize a tranquilizer pistol akin to the converted M92F that Snake used in Sons of Liberty, albeit with infinite ammo. Combined with the psi-powered charm, Vatic can hang with the big boys of the genre, and when things are running smoothly, Second Sight comes together as a mostly solid stealth experience, but not a perfect one. Almost exactly like Psi-Ops, there is an option to grab guards in a quiet chokehold, but it's just as flimsy and awkward as it is in Psi-Ops. You have to get right up to your foe and then stand up fully before being able to initiate the grab. I only pulled it off successfully twice, but failed it multiple times. I just stuck with tranks or avoidance. Other than this shaky move, the only thing that really continued to give me trouble throughout the game was the camera. Second Sight utilizes a unique tri-camera setup, adjustable at will by the player. You can use a more traditional, controllable third-person camera, a fixed cinematic angle, and a stationary first-person camera. I primarily use the free camera, and while it's mostly reliable, there are times, especially while trying to creep around, that the view is a little dodgy, and in close spaces, the camera likes to clip into the environment. If someone is above you and you're attempting to view their pattern, the camera will keep recentering and you'll need to depend on the cinematic angles or first-person mode. The first-person camera is a lot like the one utilized in Sons of Liberty, wherein Vatic can stop and aim in a fixed position. It's decent, and the FOV and weapon models are straight out of Time Splitters. but this isn't a view you'll necessarily rely on often. I did use it to peek around, and occasionally I took a tranq shot or two, but I think that's about it. With a button click, you can switch to a fixed camera perspective, a la Metal Gear and Resident Evil. And while these angles do show off the environments in their most cinematic, artistic light, they can oftentimes restrict your view just enough to where you may miss enemies hidden just outside of the lens. In a fight, this view is almost completely useless, and John can fight, just not with his fists. He can throw a few straight jabs, but that's about it. I wouldn't recommend melee as your go-to form of combat. The third-person action of Second Sight is uncommon, to say the least. Aiming is your basic right mouse button aim, left button click to shoot, except that while you're aiming, you can move your cursor within your target to make more precise shots. It's a little wobbly when trying to dodge from target to target in the heat of battle, especially in close quarters, but it works well enough for a stationary target or two. I got the hang of things well enough, but I'm afraid this was definitely not as smooth as the developers had initially intended it to be. Evidently, Codemasters, the publisher, had just seen Second Sight as filler content and didn't want to put the proper budget or time behind the game, and thus the controls weren't as polished as Free Radical had hoped. This isn't helped by the somewhat clunky cover system, but hey, at least your AI teammates can heal themselves, and after playing the god-awful escort missions in State of Emergency, this felt like a gift from the heavens. Weapons are pretty standard: the tranq pistol, a 45, an MP5K, a Kalashnikov variant straight from Timesplitters 2, a nice pump-action shotgun, and so forth. Enemies are a little spongy, but there is a fair sense of heft and force from each weapon, and if you get used to lining up shots to the noodle, you're in good shape. Second Sight is also one of those weird games where you need to aim your weapon to then reload it, or you have to be in cover, which is really strange. Again, the third-person action in Second Sight isn't the smoothest, but the animations and sound effects during fights help sell the combat, and they felt a little more impactful than those in Psi-Ops. Also, on another positive note, sniping in Second Sight is awesome. When you go to aim, the glass pulls up on the lower right-hand side of the screen. The game automatically will target enemies for you, you just need to focus and take the shot. This feels smooth and responsive, and you can get into quite a flow state. Speaking of flow, another gripe I had with this game was the fact that you have to scroll through each weapon or psi power to select it. This is something that I had no trouble with in Psi-Ops, as each power was mapped to a button, and it plays super smoothly. In Second Sight, however, I had to stop and scroll regularly to get what I wanted, and if I scrolled past it, I couldn't go in reverse, causing me to start scrolling yet again. I couldn't even hotkey weapons or powers on my keyboard, which is just baffling. On the topic of psi powers, let's get into what Vatic can do with his brain. I had mentioned telekinesis earlier and how slightly farty it is, and yeah, the point stands. I'm not saying that the power needed to be exactly like Psi-Ops or it's invalid, but after the destructive power fantasy of Psi-Ops, the ability in Second Sight looks weak in comparison. Grabbing out-of-place objects, solving puzzles, disabling cameras, and scaring guards is all good fun. Free Radical even included the ability to play basketball. Gone but not forgotten. This is how he beat Shaq. I think what really drags telekinesis down in Second Sight is the lack of cooperation between TK and gunplay. This harmony between lifting, throwing, and shooting in Psi-Ops is part of what made the moment-to-moment gameplay so enjoyable. Sadly, with Second Sight, it's just kinda one or the other. Psi-Pulse is a blast of energy that, frankly, I didn't start using more of until later in the game, after I realized that it's actually a silent attack. Each blast consumes about half of your meter so as not to be abused. Later in the game, the ability is updated to include Radial Blast, which allows John to unleash a non-lethal AoE attack. It uses a ton of energy and, again, is non-lethal. If you're in combat, you'll probably not want your opponents to get up, so Telepathic Charm is probably the most useful of the abilities that John acquires. When you use Charm, John is temporarily invisible to enemies. In a clever touch, Vatic isn't actually invisible, but as the name states, John is charming each enemy into not paying him any attention, which is why inorganic enemies like cameras can still spot you. This, along with your Psi meter draining fairly quickly, keeps Charm from becoming too OP. It feels so satisfying to plot your route and then kick on Charm at just the right moment to pass through a tight spot. If you're busted up after a fight, John can heal himself with, well, self-heal. Just find a little hidey hole and give yourself a shot of Jesus juice. In the flashback scenes, John has to use wall-mounted health kits, but either way, healing in the game is never a problem. Using projection is kind of like remote viewing in Psi-Ops, except that John's astral projection can interact with buttons and levers and the like. It's kind of neat to scout out an area up ahead, but ultimately it ends up being a means to solve a few simple puzzles. A lot like mind control in Psi-Ops, Vatic can use possession to gain control of another body. You can use possession to get an opponent to ice his own comrades, and I use this to clear out a few areas, but I found that possession, much like projection, is used for more puzzle solving. It's cool, but it's kind of underutilized. Another thing underutilized in Second Sight are checkpoints. In most levels, this is usually not a large problem, but there are a few areas where it is a massive pain. For example, this level, Conspiracy. In effect, this level is one large stealth puzzle. It has a lot of trial and error, and I do mean error. You can make all the right moves, plan each step, but if you make a mistake and get busted, the game basically spawns infinite waves of armed guards that corner you and turn you into paste. There's one single checkpoint in the level, so losing a ton of progress in one fell swoop can be annoying, and there are no options for quick save. On the console, I guess I get it, you have to conserve memory card space and all, but no quick saves on the PC port? Come on, guy. Now, when you do put all the pieces together and nail the level, it feels awesome, and I really appreciated the design. But the trial and error along the way was kind of grating. Not a massive issue though, I guess. What was a massive issue, however, was the endgame difficulty spike. So, the final boss is a complete cakewalk, I'll say that. It's very, very simple, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. There's even a scenario before this where John fights psychic troops that utilize his same abilities. It's short, but it's kind of cool to go toe-to-toe with several of these mooks. I thought these fellas would be more prominent as we coasted into the finale, but nope, never heard from again. Instead, Free Radical took the cheesy approach of throwing a large quantity of cheap, armored enemies at you in close quarters. I wrote some very foul language in my notebook regarding this segment, but now that a little time has passed and I've cooled off a bit, I'll put it more politely. You have these tough troops that have psychic shields on them. You have to throw a Psi pulse to disable it before shooting. You can just pepper the shield a bunch until it's disabled, but this is a big waste of ammo, and you need it for the amount of guys the game throws at you. I did just charm my way through this spot, which was great, but the very next section, you don't have enough energy to pull that trick. So after one frustrating battle upon another, I finally just cheesed this section by running. It just sucks that this area was clearly slapped together on the quick, and they fell into the old trope of throw a bunch of cheap nonsense at the player to make it appear as though this endgame victory was hard won. Despite the flaws mentioned, camera, finicky auto-targeting, and some frustration with a few checkpoints and areas late in the game, one thing that Second Sight has that Psi-Ops is almost completely devoid of is world building and character in the environments. Second Sight's environments are full of life, from interactable computer terminals, books that can be read, and clipboards, along with commentary that Vatic provides when checking various objects out in each level.
The Colonel called me a doctor. Yeah, I don't recognize any of this at all.
On console, I'm sure it's great, but there's something a little extra special about using an in-game PC while using a real mouse to move the cursor. It kind of reminds me of how awesome it was to use your keypad to type numbers in Deus Ex. There are so many special little details that you may not encounter on your first playthrough either, like running ahead in a level and finding a locked gate. In that same level, after a battle concludes and someone finds a key, your commander says that the team needs to find what door this key goes to. Having already found that door, Vatic simply speaks up and lets the team know where it is, allowing you to bypass unnecessary running around. Excellent. Or while sneaking through this office in Conspiracy, you can simply time your movements to avoid this custodial staffer. However, if you tranquilize her, a guard will come checking in on her. It turns out that this guard is the janitorial staff member's fiancé.
You in here? Are you hiding from me again?
I sat here for several minutes without bothering her to see if anything happens, but no, this is a unique event trigger, and I love it. The little things, like John attempting multiple passwords on a terminal that he can't access, copying video files to a disk that you find in the environment. There are just so many things that were modeled and implemented with love and care. John can even find a functional arcade cabinet with a sort of Geometry Wars-esque game built into it. This craftsmanship extends into the variety that Second Sight offers. We discussed the handful of mostly brown and gray levels of Psi-Ops with limited variety in objectives. As fun as the basic gameplay model is, you don't do much outside of a few basic puzzles. Now, the puzzles in Second Sight won't blow your mind, but the level variety keeps things somewhat unexpected and varied. When I got into the Asylum library, I just assumed that the scientists were coded to freak out when they saw me and hit the alarm, a la Snake Eater. But they don't know Vatic or why he's there, so unless you do something foolish, they'll leave you be. This little segment was wedged in between two stealth areas, and thus gently subverted my expectations. The courtyard at the start of the Asylum offers up variety too. If you climb this tower, you can find a sniper rifle. It's pretty self-explanatory what to do from there, but the area looked ripe for the sneaking, so I reloaded my checkpoint and gave it a go. And sure enough, I was able to slink my way through undetected. I love it so greatly that this gameplay variety was available. Not every level is like this, of course, but when it comes up, it's very rewarding to explore your options. And to an extent, the game keeps track of your decisions to sneak and pacify versus playing with greater violence. Free Radical incorporated a morality percentage tracker in your statistics. Though, sadly, this percentage doesn't change anything, it's just there for the viewing. What could have been. Another example of this variety is the level titled Street Life, set in a New York tenement. John is on the run from some agents and is searching for Stark. Along the way, he comes in contact with a street gang, the Vipers.
Where were the Vipers?
The Vipers are being coy about Stark's whereabouts and tell John to piss off out of here. However, John offers to do them a favor in exchange for the info, and he's tasked with delivering a mysterious package to someone in the local area. Hilariously, he's given a full-blown gang tattoo for his task, to which the Vipers respond positively upon his return. This may be the easiest gang initiation in history. This urban daytime level comes right after the mission where you rescue Jane, a friend and teammate, from captivity in Penfold Asylum. which sees John leading Jane around with his charm ability as she's traumatized, drugged, and terrified of everything. This level was fantastic, avoiding guards but getting into battles if need be, leading your battered friend gently out of this hellish place. It reminded me a lot of playing Eco, one of the most beautiful games ever, by the way. Oh, and on the subject of options,
I gotta tell you.
I wanted to mention, if you wish, you don't have to deliver the package for the Vipers. You can just try to blast your way into their turf, stealth in, or rile up your pursuing agents and lead them right to the Vipers' hideout. While they play cowboys and Indians, you slip in. It's kind of like a diet Deus Ex. Now, admittedly, this requires a lot more skill than I had, so I just resorted to delivering the package and getting some sweet ink. So that was a lot of ground to cover, but I didn't want to simply skim through each game and render a decision without being informed, whether we end up agreeing or disagreeing. Ultimately, I think you should play both games. They both clearly have many merits and many flaws, but both are well worth a playthrough to experience the gameplay on offer. If you prefer to shut your brain off and play a fun, faster-paced action game with better interplay between guns and psi abilities, Psi-Ops is the winner here. But be aware that the level variety is pretty minimal, and most boss battles revolve around using one, maybe two psi abilities to succeed. However, handling a weapon in one hand and throwing fire with your other hand, Psi-Ops begins to play like a third-person Bioshock for you old heads, or System Shock for you even older heads. Either way, Psi-Ops offers up faster, frenetic gameplay with a fun blend of creative ways to combat your enemies, and throwing a dude off of a precipice never ever gets old. There are also a host of extras to play around with, and although none of the bonus levels that I played were amazing, it's still good to have more to do. Oh, and click both sticks down when you're mind controlling an enemy. Thank me later. If, on the other hand, you prefer slower-paced psychic stealth gameplay, Second Sight might be more your speed. The aiming system can be a little finicky, but is smooth once you get the hang of it. Sniping is great, and when the stealth is flowing comfortably, you really do get that unique rush that only sneaking games can offer you as you piece together your run. The checkpoints can be frustrating, the auto-aim will occasionally target something other than your enemy, and scrolling through each item to pick your weapons or abilities definitely slows the game down. Additionally, there's not really much to do after you beat the game. It's definitely worth a handful of playthroughs for the curious, but extra modes are absent, and this is a shame considering that Free Radical is known for making games packed to the brim with content, as seen in the Timesplitters series. But overall, Second Sight is clearly a labor of love from the brilliant minds at Free Radical Design. It's a shame they couldn't give it the polish and time they had wished for, but it's the way she goes, bud.
That's the way she goes? That's right. That's the way she goes. That's what I said.
As for the winner, if you absolutely had to pick one over the other for some reason, I would choose to play Second Sight again, but I've also completed Psi-Ops more, so maybe I've just had my fill there. All in all, this one is a wash, and both games take the W. Seriously, just play both. There is one psychic ability that John Vatic has that I haven't explained yet, and there's a big clue right on the cover of the game. So, before getting into specifics, Psi-Ops and Second Sight share much more in common than gameplay mechanics. Both games see the player control an amnesiac that progressively unlocks his respective psychic abilities. Even the scenes depicting each character unlocking said abilities look awfully similar, with each man writhing in agony as their memory unhooks another power. Either character is helped along their journey by a female companion, with Vatic being linked to Jane Wilde and Scryer being accompanied by Sarah Blake at several points. As a small aside, I really appreciate that the male-female dynamic was natural, and both sides are shown to be capable and handy without forcing any kind of social memorandum. Each character helps each other out, and there isn't any goofy romance wedged in for the sake of it. But this is really where the bulk of the similarities end between both games. So, long story short, hey, literally. Yeah, you take control of Nick Scryer. Nick was a psychic agent with Mindgate, which is where Nick trained in all of his psychic abilities. Alongside fellow Mindgate agent Sarah Blake, Nick is tasked with infiltrating a terrorist organization known as the Movement. Yes, the Movement. To suppress his psychic signature that would be detected by the Movement, Nick is given an injection to clear his memory and muffle his psychic abilities. After meeting up with Sarah, she injects him with yet another magic serum that allows his memories and abilities to gradually unfold as the game progresses. Along the way, you learn that the leader of the Movement, the general that sounds like Stunning Steve, wants his own Deus Ex Machina, Luna 1, a fragment of what's referred to as the Monolith. It looks like a bunch of glowing golf balls, and apparently it allows the general to become the ultimate psychic warrior and yada yada yada. Look, to the point, Psi-Ops is perfectly acceptable, cheesy B-movie stuff. It's not unbearable, it's not sleazy or irritating. The silly voice acting, over-the-top animations, and goofy plot about a team of psychic supervillains trying to take over the world is decent fun. As I said before, it's like watching old Saturday morning cartoons, and there's enough about it that's tongue-in-cheek to where you as the audience member can laugh alongside the silliness. After defeating the general, can you believe this? Helicopters sent from Mindgate swoop in to presumably retrieve their agents, but gasp! Nick suddenly says,
"That's no help. I remember everything now. Let's get on it."
Two confirmed survivors. They are expendable. The fragments are top priority. Take them.
I guess Mindgate is hostile, so Nick and Sarah grab the lunar golf balls and run off. To be continued. Except it never was. Man, I remember playing this for the first time and thinking, oh man, I can't wait to play Psi-Ops 2, and then it never came. The dreaded eternal cliffhanger. I and many, many other people would have loved to see the next chapter in Nick and Sarah's saga. As stupid and corny as the whole plot is, it's perfectly ripe for a schlocky follow-up, or maybe even a really good one with polished, in-depth characters with arcs and all. Why not? Well, sadly, it's been 20 years, and Midway has been long defunct. So I guess it seems like we'll just have to guess what happened to old Scryer and Blake. Or maybe we're just imagining a future where Psi-Ops never got a sequel. Maybe we're still stuck in 2004 and don't even realize it. But who could think of something that outlandish?
What you got there? Shit, is this guy a mess or what?
That's nothing. You should have seen him before.
Guess he won't be dating again.
And like he's ever getting out. He's a psycho killer.
Sweet, what'd he do?
Second Sight starts with primary protagonist Dr. John Vatic being wheeled through a facility in a haze, with the two guards discussing how he's a cold-blooded killer. You wake up sometime later strapped to a gurney. With telekinesis, John unlatches himself and gets moving around the facility, bruised, bandaged, and weak. As the game progresses, we are shown flashbacks of John months prior being recruited to Winter Ice, a specialized group of US Marines sent to Siberia to recover Viktor Granko, a Russian scientist requesting safe harbor in the United States. The game bounces back and forth between past and present John, though something just seems off. Again, the clue is right on the cover of the game. Okay, I want to discuss a few spoilers and the big twist. If you already know it, watch on. If you don't want it spoiled, skip ahead to this time code. Throughout the story, John experiences what he thinks are visions of the past. He's under the impression that if he alters what happened 6 months ago, he can affect his present-day situation. Viktor Grienko is running Operation Zener, a program that studied the psychic potential of child test subjects to further USSR expansion. The kids were to be used as psychic troops in the Cold War, but after negative side effects began to emerge, such as permanent disfigurement and the kids not being able to pass puberty, thus appearing as children forever, the project was shut down. As it turns out, Winter Ice, and thus John Vadik, were all pawns to Silas Hansen, director of the National Security Executive, which is a fictional organization that's sort of a combination of the CIA and the FBI. Hansen wanted to continue Grienko's work, but for a much more sinister cause. Despite Stalin's directive to use the experiment to advance the USSR's interests, Grienko actually wanted to use his research to progress humanity, and he cared about the children under Operation Zener. Hansen simply wishes to use the research to create an army of psychic super soldiers and intended on simply executing the Zener kids once he had what he needed. This is the sampling of super soldiers that Hansen had intended on spreading across the world. So, the story thread about the Zener kids and director Hansen would likely have been enough for most video games, and it is well written and interesting. But this isn't actually the big twist of the story in Second Sight. As it turns out, past John isn't actually past John, and present John doesn't technically exist. Stay with me. John's final psychic ability is a doozy: precognition. The present-day version of John that we know, bald, bruised, accused of being a killer, all of his teammates in Winter Ice having been slain, all of it was a potential future that John had been creating in his own mind. From what I gather, it was one of the Zener children that gifted this ability to Vadik, permitting him to see into a potentially horrible future where Director Hansen tortures Vadik, starts a psychic army, and eliminates all the children from Grienko's project.
Have the powers.
What? What? What do you mean, psychic?
Why fight against it?
Because it's not real.
This will help.
Huh?
Finally, this revelation permits John to come to terms with the reality that his present is in fact what he thought was his past. I had mentioned the big clue on the cover of the game. It's the title itself, Second Sight, which is just another way of saying clairvoyant, or the ability to see into the future. The other clue is the name of our protagonist. Vadik is another way of saying prophet. I love that Dr. Vadik is a skeptic, and upon meeting Jane, immediately clashes with her and accuses her of being a phony, akin to a television psychic. But she knew the whole time that John was the one to deliver them from their horrible fate. I absolutely adore when stories drop these giant clues all over the place and then deliver a great twist at the end. It makes a second or third viewing, playthrough, read-through, whatever, much better. This was the case in BioShock as well. With the revelation, John is now in control of his mind. No more headaches, no more psychotic breaks or precognitive terror, no more buzz cut. With that, it's time to confront Hansen in the true present. Unfortunately, the last boss fight is a bit of a wet gasser. Hansen locks himself behind psi-proof and bulletproof glass, unleashing waves of armed thugs on John. We unlock these cells containing the Zener children, and they help Vadik wipe out the bad guys with their psychic abilities. It was during this fight that I realized how much more enjoyable the gameplay could be when psi powers work fluidly in tandem with firearms, a la Psi-Ops. Unfortunately for Hansen, he didn't realize the metal holding the protective glass was vulnerable. He's exposed, and John leaves the children to exact their revenge, presumably having Hansen for dinner. Didn't know they were cannibals up until now. Christ. Thus, the story concludes in the true present, with Vatic being rescued by his teammates from winter ice, all living and accounted for. Happily, the gruesome future that John had peered into is prevented. However, there is a sour sting in the tale, insofar that it's safe to assume that the US government will continue the research started by Grienko. Who knows? It could be even worse than what Hansen was doing. I liked both stories well enough, though it's clear that Second Sight spins the superior yarn. The story is just so fascinating without being overly complicated or pretentious. And I didn't even mention the rare Enigma cutscenes that play when certain failure conditions are met. Unfortunately, like Psi-Ops, Second Sight will never see a sequel. I hope I'm wrong, but the odds are kinda slim, I'm sad to say. I'd love to see the conclusion to either tale at this point, but it's time to wake up. I know that I hem and haw about how good things used to be, and I'm not an old fuddy-duddy stuck in childhood and unwilling to accept the state of things. I play new games all the time. I love the unbelievable convenience of modern gaming technology and watching video games evolve. I'm not as cynical as you might think. And personally, I know it's sacrilege, but I'd rather play Doom 2016 than the old Dooms any day, as amazing and legendary and fun as they are. But god damn it. 2004 alone had Halo 2, Half-Life 2, GTA San Andreas, Silent Hill 4, Gran Turismo 4, Fable, Ninja Gaiden, Tony Hawk's Underground 2, NFL 2K5, which is still better than Madden, and to top it off, the almighty Snake Eater. The last 4 years of so-called AAA games put together don't have shit on 2004 in terms of sheer artistic and cultural significance. And in a year jammed with masterpiece after masterpiece, Psi-Ops and Second Sight are standouts. Two games that took relatively untapped concepts even to this day and made them fun to play. The only other title that comes to mind would be Remedy Entertainment's Control. Oh, and check out Digital Hauntology's review, by the way, link in the description. There are plenty of flaws between the two games, as I've listed in this video, but the amazing, visceral psychic gameplay and sheer madness of Psi-Ops, standing shoulder to shoulder with the incredible tale and stealth action of Second Sight. You may never see that again. I really must applaud Midway and Free Radical Design for putting out such unique gems. Though competitive at the time from a business standpoint, these two games really fly together as two rare birds from days past, and they both deserve your time. Play them if you can. Alright, so the poetry is done. I've been comparing these two the whole time, and I love them both, but it's time to decide which game comes out on top. Either answer is bound to inspire a grumpy comment or two anyway, so fuck it. Let's keep it simple. Audio, Second Sight. Graphics, Second Sight. Gameplay, both. Seriously, it's not a cop-out. Both. Story, Second Sight. Based on my metrics, Second Sight is the superior game overall. And that's the bottom line.
Do I make myself clear?
I do with it?
Good going, douche. Your dreams have come true.